Welcome, everyone, to this last of our six Trail Talk Tuesday calls. And today our topic is rail trails. These talks have been sponsored by Sunflower Foundation with a great deal of expertise by the Kansas Trails Council. Couldn't have done it without Mike. The purpose of the Trail Talk Tuesdays is to give communities the resources and information they need to build and maintain public trails. We want you to see and hear from other people in Kansas who have done this work in their communities. As always, the call is being recorded and you will receive a link to the website, a copy of the presentation deck, and the Zoom chat. So feel free to introduce yourselves on the Zoom. Please tell us why or if this call matters to you. These were sponsored, as I say, by Sunflower and KTC, and we want to know what aspects of the webinars did you like the most. At the end of the call, when you try to sign out, take just one more moment, maybe 2 minutes tops, and fill out this. The only thoughtful questions that you need to think about are these three questions. What aspects of the webinars did you like the most? What aspects of the webinar would you change in the future? And what trail topic would you like to hear more about? And with that, I'm going to start our PowerPoint and introduce you to our speakers. Okay, as I say, today is April 9th, and we have 5 speakers today. I'm going to introduce Mike Goodwin, who is with Kansas Trails Council and has been a huge part of this. Trent McCowan, Larry Hatfield, Maureen Christ, and Elizabeth Weiss will also join us. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Nancy. And a quick thank you, Nancy, for being such a gracious host through all 6 of these webinars. And also, of course, we got to thank Sunflower Foundation and Elizabeth Berger for making these happen. Much appreciated. So rail trails are somewhat mystical in a way because they're not simple. Of course, when you start building, it's just gravel and rock and various things. But I wanted to start off, if you could go to the first slide, next slide, Nancy, just sort of setting the stage with some terms and some concepts, and talk a little bit about the initial stages of creating a rail trail. The other speakers will be talking about actually building the rail trails. They're in the trenches, so to speak. So when we talk about a rail trail, the whole process really begins when the railroad decides to abandon a line because it's not having much traffic and doesn't have much business. And that's a process that the railroad initiates by filing with the Surface Transportation Board an application to abandon the line. That sort of triggers a timetable, which you'll see on the screen here. There's such a thing as a notice of interim trail use that an aspiring trail organization can file with the Surface Transportation Board, along with a request for public use condition. And so once the railroad has filed their application for abandonment, a trail entity can then petition to turn that from a railroad corridor into a trail corridor. And so it sort of starts a clock running. If no one files anything within 50 days of the railroad filing, then the STB basically loses jurisdiction and the land will revert to the adjacent landowners. So you've got this little window in which to make these filings. And so it pays to pay attention to existing railroads that might be declining. So Nancy, next slide, please. So when that process begins, we start talking about this term called rail banking. This is where an aspiring trail building group can make filings, the NITU or the PUC, to say to the railroad and to the STB, hey, look, we'd like to build a trail on this corridor. And that's where it all begins. On the next slide, Nancy, I think there are a bunch of resources that you could click on any of these links. This will all be preserved if you go back and look at our presentation after the fact. You can click on any of these links. There's just some really good information there to help you figure out how to go about the process. So here are the prominent rail trail organizations in Kansas with links to their websites. And next slide, I think. I thought it might be wise before we delve into the actual how-to of what people do when they build a rail trail to talk about possible scenarios you might see. So you're driving across the state and you might see some active rail lines that are, have trains on them and are pretty busy. Those are clearly not available for a rail trail. But you might also see some limited use lines that maybe don't have very many trains, but they might have some trains on, some box cars or something sitting on the track, but they're fairly limited use. These are cases where you might begin to start watching for that railroad to file with the STB for an abandonment procedure. This is just sort of the heads up time. And then you'll find some that might have no usage at all and they've been sitting there forever, but they haven't yet been filed with the STB by the railroad. Again, watch for the railroad to do something, and then a group who wants to build a trail could pop in and beginning working on the trail. Once the railroad has filed for abandonment, then that's the time when a trail group can submit the notice of intent for use or the PUC and begin the process of converting that trail or that rail line to a actual trail. Then you might actually see some rail banked lines that are already through the process, and they have been rail banked by a trail group. And sadly, you might also find some permanently abandoned lines that never got rail banked, and so they're just reverted back to the adjacent landowners. And these are more problematic, obviously, because adjacent landowners technically own pieces of that line. Next slide, Nancy. So as you're driving across the state, you might see some lines that look like this. Well, these are limited use lines, believe it or not. These are not yet abandoned by the railroad. The railroad still technically owns and operates these lines, but as you can see, they haven't been used very much. This looks like an opportunity for a rail group to, if you watch for this railroad to actually file the abandonment, you might actually have a possibility of building a trail. So next slide, Nancy. So can you tell, is the left one rail banked or abandoned, or the right one rail banked or abandoned? You can't always tell by looking at them. If you look at the next slide, you'll see the left one actually is an abandoned line. The right one is actually a rail banked line. It just hasn't quite been developed yet. So you have to really do some research when you see these out in the countryside. Next slide, Nancy. So here is a map showing developed and rail banked trails that are not yet developed, but are perhaps in the process of being developed. The next slide shows abandoned rail lines. And so these are your opportunities. These are the lines that have not been rail banked. They have, in fact, reverted back to the adjacent landowner ownership. So again, it's going to be a challenge, but they do present some opportunities for you. So how do you figure out which one of these you could actually do something with? There are a couple of really cool resources online. Openrailwaymap.org, you'll see the link at the top of the screen here, is a really cool mapping online system where you can drill down to anywhere in the country. In this case, I selected Colby, Kansas. Notice in Colby, there's a line that has not been abandoned. That's the solid black line, but there's a dashed line that is the abandoned track lines. And if you look at the next slide, you actually could look at the Open Records for Kansas Appraisers, ORCA website, and you'll see actual landowners own those little pieces of the segment of that line that had been abandoned. That'll tell you who to contact. You can find out who actually owns each one of those parcels and perhaps persuade them to allow you to build a line, a trail. And one last. So you have all kinds of active lines in the state of Kansas, like in Casey up in the northwest corner. This line is that very first photo I said showed you that can you tell if it's abandoned or not? This is a very little used line that I think has some potential shortly, but they have not filed yet. So let's look at the next slide. And if you want to find out what's going on with this railroad, you can log into the Surface Transportation Board, type in Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and on the next slide, Nancy, you'll see there's a listing of activity at the STB. So if you want to figure out what's going on with the rail line, log into this website and you can type in keywords, you can type in names, and you can find out what's going on with that particular potential rail trail. So with that, I hope these are some resources you can use. I want to hand this off to some folks who are in the trenches. Trent McCown has been at this a long time and is manager of the Flint Hills Nature Trail as well as the Prairie Spirit Trail, and has lots of expertise that he's going to impart to us. Trent, take it away.
All right, thank you. One of the key things always when you're talking about trails and rail trails, always the rail banked and not abandoned. I mean, that's some of those common terminologies when you're speaking to someone and they'll talk about, let's look at this abandoned rail line. Always remember to talk about a rail banked rail line and get that abandoned out. It's kind of like married and divorced. There's a difference in terminology there. And so when you're talking to people, you don't want to say we want to develop this abandoned line, we want to develop this rail banked line, unless you are dealing with private properties. And then, like Mike said, you can go in on something that's been abandoned and been taken over by an adjacent property owner. You can actually go in there and see about purchasing or actually doing a trail on one of those lines. Next one. The tough nut in Kansas is always the statute to 583212, and that's the duties of responsible parties. And that's the one I get a lot of questions on. This came about back in, well, when I started as a Prairie Spirit Trail manager in 95, this statute wasn't in play. And then soon thereafter, the statute was developed, and it applies to all rail trails in Kansas. Now, this is just a partial listing. If you're involved in rail trails, it does you very well to look at 523212 and become familiar with it. Because some of the things you have to do is you have to provide for the safety of existing easements. You have to grant easements and crossings, and you have to maintain the corridor, which does include fencing, maintaining culverts, maintaining bridges, and other obligations. A thing that was put in there was always kind of interesting is that reduce the fire hazard. A lot of people don't understand in Kansas, native grass will burn quite rapidly and go pretty quick. When they're writing this up, they thought, oh, the fire hazard is all these trees and brush that's out there along the corridor, not understanding that actually mowing it down and having grass is more of a fire hazard than the trees and the brush. So that's always interesting. And provide for noxious weed control. These are some of the things, and just my 2 cents, what I always tell people on managing a rail trail: make sure your grass is cut in towns, make sure your restrooms and facilities are in good shape, make sure your noxious weeds are taken care of, and make sure that there's no broken window syndrome. When people drive by the road intersection and they look from that road intersection, what they see is good. They don't see a lot of broken down stuff or anything from that road intersection. Keep a good view. Now, when you start doing the trail stuff, what you want to do is do a good inventory. This is the Flint Hills Trail, which is a state park. The Prairie Spirit Trail and Flint Hills Trail are both state parks. This is part of the inventory we did for the Flint Hills Trail. This shows you all the different culverts, the bridges, road intersections, taking good inventory, and you can see it along through some of these pictures. Shows you some of the culverts, some of the bridges, some of the issues that we have to look at developing, and some of the things we have to look at providing maintenance for. Next picture. One of the things that we've changed from the Prairie Spirit to Flint Hills Trail, it's always important on these rail trails is access control. That's always been a key at some of these intersections, because people can get on these trails with vehicles. They could be in there pulling some shenanigans, having some access control. Now, you will never be able to keep every single person out and totally eliminate people from getting into any area, but having either bollards or gates at some of these intersections to provide at least some sort of physical barrier and posting of information is a really good deal. We went with the gates because we find those are still allows people to pass by. It's easy to open them up to get in and do maintenance. And we put a breakaway piece in there so that should in an emergency and no one has a key, those gates can be pushed open and it will shear the pin and people can gain access. And if for some reason somebody goes driving through in the middle of the night with a 4-wheel drive truck and a big brush guard and they hit the gate, it breaks the pin, and all we have to do is swing the gate back over and put a new pin in, and we're ready to go again. Next picture. And this just shows our one of our shear pins on our gates. The nice thing I like about the gates is it gives a good place to put a stop sign. It also, on the other side, we have a good place to put no motorized vehicles. And the reason we have them situated here, like you see this vehicle, it's specifically on that side of the trail. So someone pulling in, they are faced with, on the other side of that stop sign is no unauthorized motor vehicles. So they have to drive around that gate to get in. So that way they have a physical barrier that's in place, but they do go around it, and we stop them out on the trail. We say they had to go around that gate, and they had to see the sign. So those work very, very well. Another thing, the part of the statute talks about signage for safety. Putting signage out at the highways, putting signage out on the trail, and on the right-hand lower side, you've got that road name that's on those bollards. That's one of the most important things I feel, is having the stop signs at the intersections, telling to the people they need to stop before entering into the intersection area, and also having the road names. So that way, if there is an incident out on the trail, people who may not be from that area can see that road name and call in where they are. We had a recent race event, had somebody having some problems in the middle of the night, and they were able to call in from the road name they were at, and we were able to get EMS out there and take care of them. It really, really helps with response. Next one, please. Some of the routine work is your normal mowing, spraying trail surface, spraying noxious weed, trimming and trees, storm cleanup, patrol. Semi-routine work, we talk in some of the limestone screening surfaces. We get a lot of cracks in the summer times when it's really, really dry. There's always going to be fencing and repairs needed. Putting up signs. Sometimes we have to do some bank stabilization or repair stuff from drainage. Burning here in Kansas is that time of year. Work with your adjacent landowners, encourage burning. That is very good. Being a good neighbor, using the trails for a good place to backfire from. It helps the vegetation. It helps with your landowner interactions by being a good neighbor and helping to burn that. And if you go out there and try to burn some of those areas, it's very difficult because you have a 50-foot wide strip that may go on for a half mile you're trying to burn, and are worried about getting over on the adjacent property. Whereas the adjacent property owner might be doing the same thing. He's trying to burn his pasture out, but he's worried about getting over onto you. By working with that adjacent landowner, they can burn it out and they can use the trail as a backstop, and it works good for both folks. And of course, flooding and other disasters, you have to monitor the trail and watch out when you have heavy rains, heavy flooding. You may have the culverts that wash out, and you may have other things that you have to deal with. Trees down from storms. We have a lot of trees during our windstorms in the summertime. The spraying a trail surface. We usually spray the trail surface with chemicals at different points and times to help keep the vegetation down. And then we're always throughout the year out spraying and cutting noxious weeds, out cutting thistle heads, hauling them off, spraying the rosettes, and just trying to take care of the noxious weeds. Being active, taking care of the noxious weeds. Next video. And storm cleanup. After every windstorm, we're using Facebook a lot right now. We like to have trail visitors report when they see a tree down, because with the Prairie Spirit Trail and the Flint Hills Trail, we have 150 plus miles that we have to run to make sure that there's no trees down. And trying to run that and patrol that takes quite a while. Whereas if we have visitors that will post on Facebook, there's a tree down past D Road out in Morris County, then we have a good idea where we need to hit. Or if a storm went through and took out a specific area over in Miami County, then we have a good idea where we need to hit. So using social media really helps us a lot with our storm cleanup and identifying those areas. And with the drainage and repairs, water is something that is always impacting the trails. We get these big gully washers coming through, and a lot of stormwater come through that damages the trail and creates hazards. So we're out there trying to make sure our ditches are capable of carrying the water and watching our culverts and just trying to keep an eyeball on it. Next one, please. Fencing and repairs. Anytime you talk about the Kansas Trail Statute, they're going to talk about fencing. It's going to happen. You're going to have to do some fencing. You're going to have to do some repairs. We don't want cattle out on the trail. And it's one of those things, be strategic in your fencing, and just work with adjacent landowners. Next one. Vandalism. That's always the main complaint people when they talk about trails is possible vandalism. What we find is the more people are out visiting the trail, the less vandalism problems we're going to have. And we have some good clientele that come visit, and the good clientele report stuff. Where we have more stuff now is in the urban areas. We have some of the transients in urban areas, but we get on that when we see it, we take care of it. And overall that helps eliminate it. Just being out, being actively patrolling and looking for it. I'm going to go ahead next and introduce Larry Hatfield. Larry Hatfield's with the Prairie Sunset. He's with the Prairie Travelers, and they're custodians of the Prairie Sunset Trail and several others. So I'll let Larry speak now.
Okay, thank you, Trent. That was really good information. Shows some of the places of where we're trying to go with bollards and our stop signs and all of that. I've been asked to talk a little bit about what we actually did to get our trail open. And on this particular photo, you can see that was our trail when we first started. It had been grown up, had been abandoned for a while. The railroad didn't abandon it, but they hadn't used it. So this is what we went through to kind of clear everything out. This particular photo, and maybe the next one, if you can go to the next one, shows we had in 2015, we opened our trail, just so everybody knows, we opened our trail up in 2 phases. The first phase that we opened was quite a bit rural farm ground, pasture ground. There wasn't too many trees that we needed to cut down, but there were a few. This is in 2015 when we were trying to open the second phase. And it was much more of a wooded area. There was 3 miles that you couldn't even walk through. And so we started doing the cleaning of the trail. These folks, we had 11 AmeriCorps volunteers come in for 13 weeks that helped us clear the trail. And they split the time between the Prairie Sunset Trail and the Redbud Trail on the east side of Wichita that goes, well, basically from Wichita to Augusta, we're trying to get open. But these folks worked tirelessly. They cut trees. We tried to haul some of the trees off. We also chipped some of the trees. This is a picture of our AmeriCorps group on one of the bridges that we had to build. But if they went through and was able to work 6 days a week, they worked for 8 hours a day, they got things cut through. And this picture also shows some of the work they did. You can kind of see behind where you actually have a trail corridor that you can get down if you want to. Next slide, please. Okay, we have several bridges on our miles of trail. And when the railroad abandoned them, they picked up the rails and they left the bridge trestles. And they also was nice enough to leave the railroad ties that went across the bridge so that we had something that we could work with on building the bridges. So the first thing we did was create the railings. And we did that to ADA specifications. On the railings, we actually took huge lag bolts, drilled down into the bridge and tied our railings to the bridge so they'd be sturdy. We put down fencing basically on the railings so that people couldn't fall through. And they couldn't, we even put up at the end, put up some chicken wire across there so little ones or anybody couldn't stick their head through there and get stuck. We actually used wood for the railings, and we used wood screws to screw down the railings so that they would be permanent. Now, we do have maintenance that we need to do on the bridges, especially on the railing. About every 5 years, we go ahead and we paint them with stain so that the wood doesn't deteriorate quite as much, and we will replace the beams as we need to. We also have a very good group of Boy Scouts down in this area that helps us with our maintenance quite a bit. They will go through as projects and they will stain the bridges, and they've made benching for us. And we've actually had 6 or 7 Eagle Scout projects done on the trail for maintenance. And so we have quite a volunteer group that actually helps us out. If you go to the next slide, please. We debated quite a bit about what we were going to do as the surface of the bridge, simply because the railroad ties, they'd sit there and they'd be about a foot apart, and you could actually see down into the water and underneath the bridge. So we knew we were going to need to cover the bridge somehow. And this was quite a little bit ago. We were doing these bridges back in 2008 and 2009. We thought about putting wood down across the railroad ties and let that be the floor of the bridge, but we were concerned about weathering of that and how often it would have to be replaced. So we decided to put down concrete on the bridges. We actually got a hold of a cache of tin barn roofing, and we took that and we actually set it down on the railroad ties. And then we had a truck, which you can see in the background, that was actually capable of making the concrete on site. It carried in the sand, the cement, the water, and everything. And so we would, in phases, set down the tin, put down our rebar on that, and then the truck would back up and it would mix and pour the amount of concrete we had for the tin. And then as we finished, we would just move forward and repeat that process. And then we have a group that you can see actually came along and leveled out the concrete, made a smooth surface and everything. And that's how we did our bridges. This picture is kind of more or less now is for maintenance on the trail. What we do is we try to cut back at least 10 feet from the center line, because our trail is 10 feet wide, so 5 feet on each side of the center line. And we tried to cut trees back and the grass back for 10 feet from the center line. This is a rake that one of our volunteers, a tractor with a rake on it. And yes, as what was mentioned before, we have a lot of cracks toward fall as everything dries out. I don't think there's any way we're not going to have cracks in that. So we can come along and rake it down. We actually have some screenings that we can pour into the cracks and pack it down. So we're doing a lot of maintenance right now. We're actually working on getting rid of the fire hazard. We work very closely with Sedgwick County, and one of their persons will kind of give us ideas of what we need to do for the trail for fire hazard and everything. We're picking up a lot of brush along it. We try to keep it mowed back. We will rake the trail to try to keep it smooth. And we also, so that we know what happens on the trail, we have an adopt a trail, which is kind of like an adopt a mile on some of the highways where the people that adopt the mile will come along, pick up trash. They will make sure that we know if there's any trees that need to be trimmed or anything like that. And that's kind of how we're doing our maintenance at this time. Now I would like to turn it over to Maureen Christ. She is with the Blue River Trail in Marysville. Go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you. As he said, I'm on the board of the Blue River Rail Trail in Marysville. And I love to travel and I love trails. My husband and I have biked in 25 states, and our goal is to ride all of the Rails to Trails Conservancy's Hall of Fame trails. We're at about 15 right now. That experience, along with Amy Camp's book, Deciding on Trails, 7 Practices of Healthy Trail Towns, makes me excited about Marysville's path to becoming a trail town. The Marysville Convention and Tourism has been very supportive of our efforts. They recently installed new wayfinding signs, as well as an informational sign with a map right beside the trail. The trail got new mileage markers to match. You can see how nicely they coordinate. Originally, the trail extended from the north end of town to the Nebraska state line. When we were able to purchase a stretch of land from the Union Pacific Railroad, the trail was extended southward into town. When we were planning for the new mile markers, it made sense for mile 0 to be moved into downtown Marysville. Initially, the change was confusing to locals, but in an effort to make things clear for visitors, it made a lot more sense. Convention and Tourism also worked with us by sharing costs for a billboard just north of Manhattan that features the trail. Next slide, please. It's been exciting to witness the incredible support our trail receives from the community. We have a counter on the trail and the numbers continue to rise. One thing we did realize was that there was a group of people that weren't able to experience the trail because of mobility issues. So for an afternoon in the fall, we opened the trail for a motorized vehicle tour. It's been very well received. You can see how many vehicles we had. The community support has been very evident at Marysville Community Foundation's annual Day of Giving. For the past 7 years, the trail has been in the top 3 when it comes to dollars raised. Last year, the Blue River Rail Trail received 86 gifts totaling over $34,000. Next slide. So how do we let the world know about our beautiful trail? We extend an invitation. Brochures, expos, Google Maps, the Google listing, trail link, Instagram, Facebook, website. There's lots of options. Is it worth it? Our newest brochure includes a regional map, Marysville to Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a distance of about 75 miles. It's hard to get some trail users to travel much of a distance for a 13-mile trail, but the option to ride as much as 75 miles makes it worth the effort. Next slide. The Pony Express Gravel Dash hosts a great event with 350 to 400 riders each September. They include numerous distances for riders of all abilities, as well as a kids ride. The local police department gave away kids' helmets to any child that needed one at last year's event. The directors are also great advocates for the Blue River Rail Trail. They travel to numerous expos in nearby states throughout the year, You can see their setup there. They take our vertical banner along and they hand out hundreds of trail brochures to bicycle enthusiasts. Next slide, please. Oops, back one. Trail users use a lot of different ways to find a trail, and we attempt to monitor many of them, making sure that the information is up to date and accurate. We upload the photos that best represent our trail. Google listings provide a monthly report, like how many people ask for directions and how many website visits from our profile. It's interesting to track the connection between a good social media post and an uptick in people asking for directions. If your trail is not on Google Maps, I strongly suggest that as well. It takes some persistence and sometimes requires numerous attempts, but the trail really stands out in bright green. It also allows a user to click on a specific trailhead and instantly get directions to that spot. Next slide. Creating a trail is exciting, but maintaining it is equally important, as you've heard from the previous speakers. We want our visitors to have a great experience, so they spread the word and leave us a good review. We are always looking to improve and add to the trail. Recently, we added a restroom, bottle filler, and a shelter at our 6-mile mark. Now we're patiently waiting for our new bicycle playground features to arrive. There will be a tunnel and giant construction cones and rings, as well as a miniature pump track. We want one more place for kids to enjoy being outdoors and on bikes. And our friends at Marysville Convention and Tourism are making plans for a mural at the downtown trailhead. Next. The things we're doing seem to be working. The trail is the heart of downtown. It's the place for the festivals and the farmers market. We've got a great trailhead downtown that is open year-round. Backroads Bicycle Shop is doing a great business, with 75% of their business being trail related. You can see in that post, we had a group of 8 riders from Colorado stop by the bike shop before they rode our trail. And at the very southern end of the trail is Trailhead Suites Airbnb. That's new since the trail came to town. The reviews are great, and we're seeing cars in town loaded with bikes on a regular basis. So something we're doing seems to be working. Thanks. I would like to introduce Elizabeth Weiss from the Iron Horse Trail.
Thank you, Maureen. That is excellent. All of you have been great. Our trail is a little bit different, and even how we came to be. So we were part of a group called CPIN, which was Kansas Community Philanthropy Innovators Network. And it was part of a community foundation process to look at how community foundations in the state of Kansas could do impact investing. So that was our strategic thought. We didn't even have a trail in mind. And we were going to focus on revitalization of downtown. And 2020 hit. And it completely, as it did with everybody else, it pivoted everything. And we were thinking, what could we do that could spur on economic development, but be able to enjoy outside, because we knew that outside activity was the way to go, obviously, in 2020. So we had go back just one second, please. So this was our team. The slide down in the left, the bottom left, is our group of cohorts that met together. And when we decided to pivot to the trail, we had our first community meeting, and that's what you see down on the left-hand side. Those were the people that came that were interested in possibly going forward with the trail. Okay, next slide. So what we decided to do, we actually have land that is part of, we have the Smoky Valley Railroad is here. It's an excursion train. Matter of fact, it just got selected as the state Railway, and they owned the land. So they said, hey, we could put a trail here, maybe. Let's get on the Silver Flyer bus and go scope out where the trail could go. So we all got on the bus and took a great ride. And as we were on the bus, we decided that we really wanted to do this and to hold a community meeting. So next slide. So we did. We had a big gathering at our local high school, and we talked about what this trail could do for our community and all of the benefits for the trail. We had great turnout. But as you can expect, next slide, this is what happened. We had the pitchforks and the torches and the farmers, everybody hated us. We were not welcomed at the table for this discussion at all. And we received calls from attorneys going, you can't do this. And we just kept going forward, going, this is private land. The excursion train owns from the middle of the track to 50 feet on both sides of the track. So we knew that we could actually do a trail that went along beside it. So we just kept going through the pitchforks, and we came up with a logo. So we said, you know what, it's going to go beside the train, and we're going to call it the Iron Horse. And you wouldn't think that creating a logo within a group of people that wanted this trail, that it would just, everything would just work together. That in and of itself caused some controversy, but we kept powering through, which is obviously what trail people have to do if you really want a trail. So we got a great logo. Next picture. And we were trying to convince people, this is what a trail can be. This is what a trail can be alongside of the train. And again, we just kept powering through all the negativity. And when we knew this was going to happen, we said, okay, we need to apply for some grant money to make this happen. So we did. We applied the Sunflower Foundation and received a wonderful grant from there. Blue Cross Blue Shield gave us a grant. The state of Kansas gave us a grant. And in addition to the Community Foundation in and of itself had a legacy gift, and the gentleman was a biker and hiker, and we were allowed to use some of his money to be the match for all of those grants. So we just kept going forward. So next slide. So you can see our trail is going to be 5 miles from Abilene to Enterprise, and that's the first part of the trail, if you will. There's there's a big railroad bridge and a trestle that, as we were planning this, going, how are we going to get across the river? So we have a gentleman here in Abilene who is a wizard with creating things, and his name is Joe Minnick. He is part of the Abilene Smoky Valley Railroad, and he said, I think that we can just put beams underneath the bridge and build a sidewalk beside the train. So we started, next slide. So we started doing that. That's Joe in the picture. A great guy, and I'm telling you, if it wasn't for Joe, this trail would not be into fruition. So he's been gathering volunteers to come, and we've been building the sidewalks in town and taking them out and putting them on both of the trestle bridges. The trestle is done. The big bridge is almost completed. Next picture. You can see we're probably really not OSHA. So hopefully nobody on this call will call OSHA for us. Again, all volunteers making it happen and going despite all the negativity that has been going on for this whole project. So this will be the sidewalk that goes across. They have railings up, so it will be safe. Next slide. And this is what the trail looks like going beside the railroad bed. So again, it's an active railroad. top speed is 5 miles an hour. You can hear the whistle coming, so we should not run into any danger. And at the end of the trail from Abilene into Enterprise, we have the Hoffman Grist Mill that people can go and see the grill, the mill actually working, which is exciting. And we have a couple more projects that we want to do. Next slide, please. So this is, here's the trail. We're out celebrating that it was open, and you can see these rail bikes on the left-hand side. So we also have 5 miles of rail that goes from Enterprise almost down to Harrington, which is going to be the trailhead for, I think it's the Flint, not the Flint Hill Trails, the one that's coming in from Cottonwood Falls. And we really want to put a trail from there, but we don't know if we can logistic wise and cost, but we thought maybe we could get rail bikes going. So that's kind of our next project in addition to the walking trail. Next picture. So we had a grand opening of the first section of the trail. We've done it in 3 pieces. The first one was completed 2 miles, and that's done, and that's the Mary Jane Ord section of the trail. It's just been very exciting to see this all come to fruition. None of us were trail builders. Few of us were hikers, but we were not trail experts. And we did this for our community, and now people are out there, they love it. And the farmers have realized that there's really not chaos on the trail. We don't have hobos and people throwing out cigarettes and all of the hooligans that was supposed to be camping out on the trail. So far, knock on wood, that has not happened. And it should be completed, the bridges and everything should be completed by the end of spring. So the whole 5 miles will be ready this spring, summer. That's it.
Elizabeth, that just underscores what I think all of us trail folks have been saying for a long time. And it takes a bunch of you who are just totally committed to keep going and keep going and keep going. And it gets done. Fantastic.
Eventually.
Eventually, yeah. Patience. Patience is a big word. One question that I saw in the chat room that I wonder if I could circle back around to Maureen. Nancy, I think everyone's the speaker's contact info, email addresses and such will be posted so people could contact any of us. There was a question about the cost of the various amenities that are being added to the trail. And so I'm thinking anyone who's interested might contact Maureen and any of the other folks involved in a specific trail to ask questions about kiosks and signage and bollards and things of that sort that get added at the end of the process of building a trail.
Absolutely.
Another question that came up, and maybe this is for either Larry or Trent, how often do you actually go back and take a look at that inventory, Trent, for example? It changes a little bit as you put in culverts and as they get washed out or whatever.
Yeah, it does change just a little bit, but not too much. I mean, usually, the railroad had the culverts in the right places. Normally, we'll go in and maybe redo some of them. We redo the bridges. We have had to put some extra culverts in here and there, but you just add on to the inventory. You adjust it. We don't do any massive, like, go through everything and check it on an annual basis or anything like that. Like the bridges, the bridges do get looked at, like on a once a year or once every other year. The ones over the highways and some of those bridges do get looked at. So you have an inspection on those, and just through normal out on the trail, just the normal maintenance. So I wouldn't say an exact schedule, just as needed is my thought. The initial inventory is the important one.
Obviously, it takes a while to do it too. So I'm curious, maybe Larry could weigh in on this one. So the map that you showed, Trent, with all of the inventory of bridges and culverts and such, it's almost a solid line of such things, right? Because there are tons of them. Larry, I'm wondering, did you have tons of bridges and culverts and such to deal with as well?
We had, yeah, tons of bridges and culverts. And Kelly Wentz, our trail manager, he has a program that he will put in if there's any maintenance that needs to be done. If we finish that off, and it's all of the prairie travelers can get into this and take a look and see what needs to be done. Like right now, we have a low area on the trail that we've had some huge rains. And it's washed the gravel away and everything. And we actually got a local business that went out, took a look at it and said, what you need is 3 culverts here in these places. And it was just by chance that they do culverts, and they had a whole bunch of remnants in their backyard, and they're going to give us the culverts. And then we've got another gentleman that's kind of semi-retiring contractor, and he's going to put them in for us. So yeah, we are constantly taking inventory like that. And like I said, we work really well with Sedgwick County, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he will go out and he will inspect the trail once, twice a year or whatever. And he lets us know if we have noxious weeds we need to spray, or if he thinks brush is piled up enough that it's become a fire hazard, and that we need to take care of. And so, and he will even help us spray for the noxious weeds. So we've got quite a group that helps us make these decisions and kind of helps us work through it. But we do have a program that kind of catalogs all of this that we need to do, and have we got it done. And our goal is 25 years from now, when none of us are building trail, the next group can come along and see what we've done, see what needs to happen, and go from there.
Keep going westward, right?
We're going to try to keep going westward. We're working with the city of Garden Plain, and we are working with the railroad company to try to get that abandoned rail banked and moved on. So that's a process.
You know, I think the other thing that comes up with all of the potential for rail trails across the state is okay, how many people actually use these things? So I'm kind of curious, Elizabeth and Maureen, maybe could weigh in. Have you done trail counters? Have you had events? Do you have a sense of how many hundreds or thousands of folks are actually using your new trail?
We do not yet, because the trail is not complete all the way through. We're just not doing anything, but eventually I think we're going to get a turnstile that would just count, at least at the trail head.
Be fun to put a bicycle through.
We do have a counter on our trail. I apologize, I don't have those numbers in front of me. I know that when we first put it in, we were shocked at the numbers, and it's been very beneficial when it comes to applying for grants, you know, to prove that we have the usage.
Trent, I know you keep track of a lot of that stuff. How many thousands of folks run and or bike on your trails?
Yeah, we track the visitation, but you know, they're very rough numbers. And a lot of it comes down to, we did some, back in the early days, we did some initial surveys where we literally put people out. I had volunteers, and through some of the different community programs, through the Green Thumb program and through some other stuff, that we put volunteers out, and they would just literally count. We'd have different days. They would sit out. One of them was a young mother that had a small child, and she could take her child, and they could go out there and they could sit there for the afternoon. They literally just counted the people that went by, and we could extrapolate from that, you know, giving on these certain days, you know, we're getting this many people. And then we just kind of use that as a real baseline for getting our numbers. We probably are very low. We probably underreport our visitation. But if you look at the numbers we report, and you think this many numbers divided by this many days, so you go out on one of those days, take 3 days, say I should see 50 people in you know, each day for 3 days. you go out and you might see 41 days, 60 the next, 70. It gives you a rough idea of where you're at. The bad thing about rail trails, there's so many access points. And we have a fair in Ottawa, the Franklin County Fair. We have thousands of people that walk down the trail to get into the fair. Same way in Anderson County, we have thousands of people that walk down the trail to get into the fair. Those are technically trail users, trail visitors. So you kind of have to figure that in because they're making use of that facility. Getting exact numbers is tough, but we just do the best we can.
Well, I guess the other side of it is you have a linear trail. And so from one end to the other, in your case, is many, many, many miles. The longer the trail, the more difficult it is to cover those miles. And so someone mentioned adopting a section of a trail. And I'm wondering, Elizabeth, do you have folks that are adopting part of your new trail? Or
We
trash
sure
pickup and
hope.
such?
We haven't really even got there yet. So, I mean, we have signage and benches and all the stuff that we have to get going. We're really just working on getting the trail completed.
Early days. Yeah, it's early days. Yeah. So Maureen, one question that came up too in the chat room was, how did you figure out what vehicles to allow on that motorized day or event? And how did that go? I mean, you could see possibly damaging the trail if you let something too large on.
We had previously had one a few years ago, and we actually had hay racks with tractors. We made sure it was a dry day so the trail was solid. It wasn't as comfortable for the older people that were joining us that day, and so by using side-by-sides or golf carts, it was much easier for them. People were very respectful, and it just turned out to be a great event.
Can I throw something in there, Mike?
Sure.
We do a golf cart ride usually once a year where we have local like seniors and some of the nursing homes. We take out a day and we do a golf cart ride, and that's very, very well received. And we have volunteers that donate golf carts and they go out there. And we use a utility vehicle, the side by side on the Prairie Spirit and out on the Flint Hills a little bit. And what we've done, we've went over and we switched the utility vehicle tires to actual car tires. So we run a smooth surface car tire on there, because if you're out there running the side by sides up and down the trail and you catch somebody else that's running a side by side, sometimes it's hard to say, well, you really shouldn't have that vehicle out there because it's got the aggressive tires. Because a lot of the utility vehicles, people will get them and they have very aggressive tires and they get on there when it's a little soft and they can damage the trail surface. By this mechanism, since we do have smooth car tires, street tires on our utility vehicles, it doesn't rut up the surface. And we can also, when we're speaking to people about unlawful vehicle use on the trail, say, well, your tires are so aggressive, they're going to tear the surface of that up. So you need to either put smooth tires on there or come up with something that has a smooth tire so it doesn't damage the trail surface. And those tires, the car tires actually last a lot longer than the ATV or UTV tires. They're less aggressive and they're cheaper.
Yeah, they would be. So I see Elizabeth just posted. Elizabeth, I don't know if you're mobile or have audio, but I could pass along your thought on the KATT. So there's a new association called the Kansas Association of Trail Towns, and apparently they're doing an economic analysis of the impact of trails through various towns throughout the state. And Nancy, I think there's going to be some results of that announced and or described in the coming First Friday talk, right?
Right, in November 1st.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And, I don't know if there are any other general questions. We're kind of coming up on our end of our session. I just want to, again, thank everyone for participating, both the speakers as well as everyone attending. We've had a great time. I think these 6 webinars have been a lot of fun. And hopefully, if you have questions, you now have some resources about how to build trails, including rail trails. You can contact us by going back to the trail session, these webinar sessions that are online. Nancy, you could maybe remind folks how they can find those and they can go back to find links and contacts and things of that sort.
Right, right. So on the Public Trails website, which I posted there in the chat session, well, and I'll put it again on the constant contact email that goes out. All of the videos are there, along with the PowerPoints and along with the chats, because we found so much information gets shared in the chats. And then we've actually added some additional resources like grants that are available for trails, or Get Outdoors Kansas, the Kansas Trails Council, and anything that we've identified. There are some really expansive websites out there, and we've tried to take just the bookmobile version on our website so that you can find the key things that people have mentioned on this call. So that actually concludes our session and our series, and I hope you will take just 2 minutes longer and give us some feedback at the end. When you sign off, there'll be a survey. And I'd like to thank Elizabeth and Mike, Elizabeth for the funding and Mike for the expertise, both of which have been extremely helpful. And I always like to leave you with a little thought for the day. This one comes from an unexpected source, Frank Lloyd Wright, who says, study nature, love nature, stay close to nature. It will never fail you. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye.